Welcome back everybody. Today I'm going to show you how to get PostgreSQL set up on a Windows machine. Specifically, we're going to be using Windows Subversion for Linux 2. So that's the only prerequisite that you need. You are going to need some time to set it up if you haven't, like updating Windows and stuff like that. I'm going to leave a link in the description with the installation instructions for that. So go ahead and follow that before starting this video. If you've got that set up, you're good to go. Right, so just a big disclaimer, I'm not going to be teaching SQL, I'm just going to show like the basic things you need to set up a PostgreSQL, and then we're going to go ahead and integrate it in our application. So if you just want to know how to set it up and you know SQL, you're in a good place. If you don't know SQL and you don't know how the query language to the database, I'm not going to be teaching that. You're going to have to learn that somewhere else. This is primarily just a setup video and how to interact with it through the command line, through the C# native client, and through the entity framework client that they provide. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, what you want to do is on your machine, you want to go to the Microsoft Store. And in the Microsoft Store, what I'm going to recommend, you don't need to do this, but I would recommend to install the Windows terminal. Okay, so you can get the preview, you can get the other one, doesn't really matter. So go ahead and install that, and once you have it, this is what it's going to look like. So here you can see one of these are already a Windows Subversion for Linux for me. From this drop down, you will be able to select multiple ones. So I'm going to select PowerShell here, and from the PowerShell we can use the WSL. This is Windows Subversion for Linux command line. So here we can do stuff like list and maybe put a verbose flag where we can list all of ours with the version. So this Ubuntu version is actually of WSL1. So what I'm going to show you is how to get a version 2 set up, and how you can basically have a little like from scratch instance every single time. Okay, and you can like basically practice with it, scrap it, practice with it from the start, right? Because repetition is primarily what's going to give you the skills to do it from memory. So next thing, from the Windows Store, what you want to do after you got your terminal, you want to go and find Ubuntu 18.04, and you will only get this option after upgrading to Windows Subversion for Linux 2. Okay, so go ahead and launch it. You may have the install button there. Go through the installation process. So it will ask you for your username. Go ahead and give it a username, a password, something like password. I don't know. I don't think it needs to be too secure. And there it is, right? So go ahead, exit from this terminal. You can open this terminal by putting Ubuntu or whatever version. Again, from the Windows terminal, I don't think you will get it straight away. So what you can do is you can close it all, you can open it, and then you are gonna have the option here. Okay, so let's go ahead, open PowerShell. If you don't have, again, this Windows terminal, you can open PowerShell here. And what we want to do is we want to list these, and you can do /v for verbose flag, and you will see the version 2. So what you're looking for is to have version 2 next to one of these boxes. Okay, once you have that, what we want to do is we want to invoke the export command, right? So let me pull this full screen now. Hopefully you can see this a little bit clearer. We want to use --export, select a distro, and provide a file name. So let's do WSL --export. We're going to grab a name, so you can just highlight it if you have never used the terminal, and then once you've highlighted something, right click and you can paste it straight away. For me, I'm going to put it on disk D. I have a workspace folder, so I'm just going to put it there, and we can do something like WSL2 _ Ubuntu 18.04 and .tar. Okay. Now go ahead and enter this command. What this is going to do is this is going to create a tar file here. Once this is done, this should be something like just under a gigabyte. So we're going to come back when this is finished. Okay, so there it is. Didn't take too long. Now, once we have this image, what we can do is we can create a separate instance of WSL to play around with, and discard it when we need to with the unregister command. Okay, or termination. I think that's just shutting it down. But basically, now what we want to do is we want to do the import flag, and let's go ahead and do this, right? WSL import. How do we want to call it? Ubuntu test. Where do we want to specify for the distribution to be installed? Kind of like you have your Windows folder with the system files and stuff like that. Where do you want this distribution to live? So that's the directory, and where is the current sort of boot disk lives, right? And that's the directory of the tar file. So name of your distribution, where do you want it installed, and where are we grabbing the source from? Go ahead, run that command. Once that's over, we're gonna proceed. It didn't take too long, right? So again, we can list all of our versions, and now you should have an Ubuntu test. Again, in this drop-down menu, it's not gonna show up straight away. So what we can do, we can close it. Let's just close. Oh, actually, probably worth it. Let's take a look in there. So I've specified this directory to install my test one. So you can see there it is. Okay. Now, reopening the Windows terminal, what you're going to see is you're going to see your Ubuntu test instance. Let's go ahead in here, and now we can use it, right? So if you've never used Linux machines before, this is a good way to practice. The reason we're doing it in WSL2 or Windows Subversion for Linux instead of just installing it on Windows is because once you go to install your application on the server, it's very likely to be a Linux machine, and being able to be in that same environment as on the server on your local machine helps a lot with just learning the syntax, learning the ropes and stuff like that. Again, I'm not going to be explaining too much about Linux. You can go ahead and learn that on your own. I highly recommend it. You won't be able to just go, all right, I'm going to go and learn everything about Linux. Don't go and do that. Find specific things that you find confusing and Google those. For example, the file system. Like, what are all these files? Where are they located from? I don't know, go Google it, right? But let's go ahead and type clear to clear the console. What do we want to do? First of all, the way that the applications work on Linux are very, very comfortable, in my opinion. How we just installed something from the Microsoft Store, I look at it as the same way you can just install it from the app. I don't know what it is, package manager, program manager, whatever you want to call it. But let's go ahead and type in apt update. And this is just, I don't even know what this actually does. I'm assuming it just brings you to the current version of whatever, of everything. But go ahead, run that. Once that is ran, we can go ahead and install Postgres. This is going to, and PostgreSQL, sorry about that. Press Y to accept whatever thingies. And this is going to install Postgres 10. To install Postgres 12, you need to add some references to some repositories or some packages. Again, I'm not entirely sure what those bits are. I just know how to set this up. So once this is done, I'm gonna walk you through some of the basics. Okay, so once this is installed, let's go ahead clear this. And usually how you would find or list the current running services on a Linux machine is you would use systemctl. On a Windows Subversion for Linux too, systemctl, I don't think it's enabled. I think you can enable it in some crazy way. We're not doing that. What we need to do is use the service command instead, right? So you type it in, you can see the status all, and then you can see all your current services. Plus means it's running, question mark, I don't know what the question mark means. Minus means it's not running, okay? So one thing, if you're like, I can't see it, I have like a gazillion services, what you can do is you can put a pipe, and pipe is one of the best things since sliced bread. I highly recommend you learn how to use it. It basically takes the output into here, and it puts it into here. So if you can think of each individual commands as a program, and then the next command is a program as well, right? But essentially every single program is like a function. So you're composing programs, you're composing functions, like function composition. You take the output of one program, you put it into the next one, and all grep does is it really will just output the occurrence that you're looking for. So we can type something like post, grep post, it's going to find the occurrence of post, and it's going to stop right there, right? And we can see it's not running. So if you ever are listing a bunch of files and stuff like that, you can use pipe grep. And the reason I'm explaining this is because it's a very, very useful thing. I think I use it all the time. So in service, we want to PostgreSQL and start it, right? So that's going to start our service. So now we can go ahead and retype the command. And if you're wondering how I just brought the command up, I'm pressing the arrow key up. If you have one of those funky keyboards, I'm assuming you know what you're doing where you don't have arrow keys. So I have arrow keys, and that's what I'm pressing. Okay. So now we have the plus next to our PostgreSQL server. How do we use it? Well, to start or rather to get into the command line to control or to interact with the PostgreSQL database, you need to type in PSQL, all right? And that is going to tell you the root doesn't exist, right? So when you initially install your PostgreSQL server, what you need to do, or what you actually get with that installation, is a Postgres user. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to switch user to Postgres. Okay, this is a user that gets put into your machine. You can see now we went from root to Postgres, and now if we type in PSQL, and we can log in into our PostgreSQL database. For all things, you type \, and that is going to give you a list of a bunch of commands. To exit this, you press Q. If you want to exit, you can't just type in exit or whatever. Right here you can see it will type in a command, and then it goes to --. It kind of tries to execute your query further. So this is actually a query language. So this is where you type in your SQL, like select, insert, create database, and stuff like that. If you want to exit, you need to put \Q. And again, this is the sort of command that you can actually find here. So you would see it \Q, quit PSQL. We can find some other commands like list, tables, and views. If we go down here, another important thing to know is list roles. Roles are actually users, okay? And that is where when we tried to log in as root, it said us that this role doesn't exist in the database. So it just basically said this user doesn't exist in the database, we can't let you log in, okay? Moving down a little bit, we can also list databases, okay? So let's go ahead and try some of these commands. \al, we can see all the databases. \d, yeah, \d list tables and stuff like that. \dg list all the users, so we only have one user currently. And again, if we look at the previous message again, where it said that the role root didn't exist, so it didn't let us in. That's basically it. Let's go ahead and just find our footing just a little bit, right? This is not a big lesson on SQL. We're just going to create database. We're going to call it test, and you're probably going to do this. I always do it. I forget to put the semicolon in the end. The command doesn't execute it. I input it on the end there, and then I press enter. Okay, so you'll see me do this a couple of times. You can press upwards like in a normal terminal, bring up your previous command, and like create another database, right? And now if we go to list databases, you can see those two databases in there. To switch between databases, again, this command, you can find it in the \, but let's go ahead and switch the connection to the actual database where we want to go. So you can see the name will change from Postgres to test. So we're switching between the databases once we create it. In this database, again, we can go ahead and \d, no relations, no tables. Let's go ahead and create a table. So create table, we'll say cars, and that was a bad command. Let's exit it. So Control-C to exit it. I'm gonna bring, actually, yeah, let's start again. Create table cars. I'm just gonna try to explain like a little quirk that I found weird, so you don't need to suffer the same way I did. So here we're just gonna say name, a number, or I think it was just integer. We don't really need to concern ourselves too much with creating a proper table and stuff like that. But here we're going to create a table, cars, where it's going to only have one column and that's going to be named with an integer, right? So now if we list all of our tables, obviously use the wrong command first, otherwise the next one won't work. Now we select all. You don't need to actually use all uppercase, but let's go ahead and select all from cars. Obviously forget the semicolon, and there it is. Now what we can do is, if I bring back this command here, we can put quotes around this one, and what it will do is it will create us another table with the uppercase name. Now what will happen is, if we want to query the uppercase table, we need to put it in quotes. Okay, so if we would do select all from cars, this is now selecting from the uppercase one. If we are doing it like this, we would be selecting from the lowercase, right? So it actually ignores cases, right? So let's just prove this real quickly. So we're going to, if I remember how to type, insert into, we'll say cars, values, and we'll say just one. All right, and obviously semicolon. So if we bring up our select from cars, there will be nothing there. But if we put it in quotes, we'll be selecting from the uppercase one, right? So this is just so you understand, if you need case sensitivity, put it in quotes, okay? Otherwise, it's just gonna default to lowercase. Now, with that being said, this is pretty much like the basic rundown of interacting with it through the command line, right? We created tables, this is just interacting with technology, like this SQL syntax. If you know any Microsoft SQL, if you worked with Oracle, God bless your soul, you should know this stuff, right? Or learn it somewhere else. Now, let's go ahead, exit the user. So we are back at root now, and what we're going to do is we're just going to go into etc PostgresQL folder, and here we're gonna have the folder 10 main. So I'm pressing tab for command completion, and in here we're going to have a bunch of files, right? So these are configuration files for different sort of things, and we're gonna quickly go over them as well now, because first of all, before we do go over them, what I want to do is I want to try and connect to this database from my linkpad script, right? So in the interests of time, I've already wrote this script up, and what we're gonna do, this is actually, let's start with Postgres. The password, I always use password for tutorials. Postgres is the user that we should be able to connect to the database, and the port, right? So starting with the port, how can we find out what port are we running on? First one is really, you can look in PostgreSQL conf, and if we use the cat command, so cat PostgreSQL conf, and here at the top of it, all the way top, right there, you can see the port. And if you actually seen me scroll the way up like that, you know what you can actually do is you can grab port, all right, and that's just gonna make your life a little bit easier. So the current port is set to 5432. If we try to do that, 5432, and by the way, if you want the native SQL client, it's the npg SQL NuGet package, okay? If we try to run that, password authentication for Postgres failed. One problem with this is that we're running on Linux currently, okay? So this is another quirky thing with having it running in a subversion for Linux, is if I have my process hacker 2, one of my streamers recommended it to me. It will be maybe a little bit hard to see. I don't know how to zoom in on this. But basically, if we go into services, or actually network, in the network tab, we can see everything that takes up ports. In here, if we type in Postgres, we're gonna see that it's currently running on port 5432, right? The important thing to understand here is that you may already have a Postgres database on your computer, and it's running on your Windows side. So if you think of your Linux side as being inside of your Windows side, so it's not actually this instance that is running here is not actually the database in our Windows subversion for Linux. Okay, if here we type in WSL, we're not gonna see it. So that's how you want to find it. You want to be able to find your PostgreSQL instance under the WSL filter here. Okay, so at the moment we only have a couple instances of Postgres here, so make sure you don't occupy the same port as these ones. So let's go ahead and edit this file and put our PostgreSQL server on a different port. Now, if you've never used Vim or VI, don't press too many buttons. You want to use VI, go to the path of the file and press enter. This is going to open the file now. This is not like a regular text editor here, okay? So just be careful with what you press, otherwise everything's going to explode. Scroll down, use the arrow key, come to the port, and what you're going to do is you're going to slowly come to the end of the port. You're going to press the I key. This is going to highlight and insert here, okay? And then you're going to press delete, delete, delete to delete the from characters. And then you're going to put some kind of a port, really doesn't matter. And then you're going to press escape to exit the insert mode. And then you're going to press semicolon. That is going to put a command input at the bottom here. And you're going to write WQ. So write and quit. You're going to press enter, and that is going to save your file. Again, you can rerun the cat command with the grep to see that the port has changed. And now what we want to do is PostgreSQL restart. And we're going to actually service PostgreSQL restart. And we're going to restart our PostgreSQL server as the command implies. And now, if we look for WSL, we're gonna see this post, right? So it's a little bit of a pity that it doesn't show that it's a PostgreSQL program running. You can just see that it's your WSL instance. So that's the only downside of it. Otherwise, just understand that other PostgreSQL instances may be occupying your port. So you want to make sure that you are pointing to a unoccupied port when you're starting your PostgreSQL server, okay? So once we have that connected, I don't think I need this anymore. Let's go ahead and use the test database. Here I already am using cars here. You can see the password's password, so let's go ahead and run this. And you may still see the warning for the password authentication failed, and that is probably because you first need to change the port, and you will still see it. Now, the important thing here, again, is when you've logged in as your PostgreSQL user, you haven't set the password, so you actually want to go and change the password for your PostgreSQL user. So, okay, I just thought I had 2 R's there in the username, but now let's go ahead and again switch to our Postgres user and go to PSQL. And now we're going to run a command that's basically going to change the password, right? So alter user, what user? We want Postgres with password, and we will say something like password. Keep it easy, right? There we go. Now we have changed the password. If we come back to our linkpad script, we should run it and we should see the one being output here, right? So this is the thing from the cars. If we just specify the cars here, we should get nothing in the end, okay? So that is basically a really easy setup for getting it up and running on versions on Windows sub Linux 2. And basically having a discardable instance. So again, I think I mentioned this in the beginning. If I didn't, the way that you remember this, you practice, delete the instance, set it up again, delete it, set it up again until you think like, all right, I can do this in my, like first thing I wake up in the morning, I can go ahead and set it up. It's not a thing that it's not a very interesting skill or anything like that, but just being able to do it on a whim kind of helps. Another useful command is, I forgot to mention it. Let's go ahead here, and if you want to find out what port is being occupied by a program on your Linux side, you can use netstat and toolpin. And here you will see one of the things that is running is actually our Postgres application, and it is occupying port 5666. All right. You can think of the Postgres user as a root user for your database, like the ultimate admin sort of thing, same as you would like have a root user for your Linux machine. That's not necessarily the user that you want to use to interact with specific tables. For example, we're just quickly going to go into etc. Actually, let's exit this and be as root. We're gonna go cat etc PostgresQL -10 main, and in here we're gonna have pghba. I don't know what that stands for, quite frankly. If you've ever used Microsoft SQL Server, this is pretty much like the security side of it. Who is allowed to what database, so what type of connection. Here it's primarily these columns. You can see local connection, all databases, Postgres user, and peer. So this is kind of like Windows authentication token sort of thing. Otherwise, we can use password authentication on what IP addresses. So which user, what database, where you're allowed to connect from, what type of authentication you need to use. Once we go ahead to deploying our application, I'm going to show you how to set this up for a specific user and etc. Now that we know that, let's go ahead and set up another user really quickly, just so we can get a little bit of an idea what that takes. Okay, so switch user, Postgres. Again, go into PSQL. We're going to create role, and let's call it link pad. We'll say it's allowed to log in, and password, we'll set its password to password. So there we go. So if we, I think it's DG. If we list our users, we are going to see we have a new user there. Now let's go ahead and try this user. So if we go back into link pad and we try to supply the link pad user here and we run it, what we're going to see is that the permission is denied to connect to the cars database. Let's go ahead back to our terminal, and what we need to do is we need to connect to the database where we want to grant the permissions to that user to that database, right? And specifically what we want to do, and I don't know this command off by heart, so I'm reading off the other screen. If you want, I can copy it. I mean, I have my PostgreSQL setup instructions here. I highly recommend that whenever you research something, just write it all down, all the commands, everything you've done to set it up. I mean, because chances are you're going to have to repeat this thing. This is the command that we want to use. No way am I remembering this. This is a one-time setup kind of thing. So grant all privileges on tables in schema public 2. So you just got to be in the same database. Paste the goddamn command. PSQL connect test. Paste the command, and who are we granting it to? We're granting it to linkpad. Okay, always forget the semicolon, and there we go. So now that we've given it permission, let's go ahead into linkpad. We can run the command, and again, we can access the database. Okay, so in the future, when we're deploying to our what's called to our Linux server, when we set up a user, we do the appropriate permissions where the user will not be able to delete the whole database. He will just be able to interact with the tables there. Okay. Now, as for this is a close this input. So this is using the native SQL client. In reality, what we're going to be using is a entity framework client. Okay. So the entity framework client, if you've never used entity framework, and you're not part of this tutorial series, or you haven't been watching, you may depart to the first episode and watch the introduction, or carry on watching if you are C# head. So entity framework looks like a regular DB context. The only thing that's changing is we have entity framework core, and this is an NPG-SQL entity framework core PostgreSQL provider. Go ahead, it's just a NuGet package. You add it to your script, you add it to your application, and what you essentially have is your app DB context. You inherit from DB context, you supply your configuration here, which is, we'll say, a linkpad username, that's with the password. So it's just the same connection string as we've been using here, but now we are essentially querying the database through the appdb context client, right? So we just toList all cars, we dump it, and obviously get nothing. Did it point it to the right database? I did not. It's pointing to shop. Let's point it to test real quick. It's telling me a primary key is required. Keyless entity call has no key. Okay, so let's go ahead and protected override void on model configuration or on model config. I can't remember. Let's go into the DB context, and I think I just need to provide some options there that I'm not remembering. So let's see in here on model configuring or something like that. On configuring, there it is. There is the signature. Let's go ahead, grab it, put it in here. Okay. Close this bit. Did I just copy the wrong thing? Maybe on model creating. I think this was the one. Yeah, let's go on model creating. I think this was the one. Yep. So model builder entity, let's say car as function has no key. Okay, there we go. Let's run this. Column C name doesn't exist. Maybe okay, and there we go. So a bit of a faff, but hopefully you get the picture. Same connection string, just tables. You're just using an PostgreSQL entity framework provider, and that's pretty much the end of the story. Now, another way, if you're using Rider or any of the IntelliJ IDEs, if you look in the actions for database, you can still use this to connect to a bunch of different databases. I'm not sure, never tried this with Visual Studio, so you might be able to have that, but you have the PostgreSQL option here, and if we know our connection string, we know how to connect to this as well. So Postgres password, you know my password. If you have a an option to it will require you to install some drivers or something like that. Just press that, and you should be good. So you can connect to this. I'm gonna have a couple of databases. If you go into schema public, let's give this a refresh. Should be okay. Connected to the wrong database. Let me just quickly configure this. And where's the database that we want to connect to? We want to connect to test, apply, okay. Just give this a refresh, and there we go, right? So you can interact with these. You can open up a console. Actually, I already had one open. So select all from, you get IntelliSense and stuff like that, cars, Control Enter to run your query, and there you go, right? So there's a bunch of ways that you can interact with this. I would not prefer like a full-blown administrator UI console. That's not my thing. If you want one of those things, go ahead and Google it. I'm pretty sure those GUIs exist, but you have options, linkpad scripts to quickly write up your queries, whatnot, either through the native client or the entity framework client. Just a quick check, what data do you actually have in the database and stuff like that. Or you can go ahead into your command line and just interact with it directly, configure it, restart it, scrap it, build it again, whatnot. Okay, and one thing to remember, write things down, otherwise you will forget it, because you're only going to do it once, and you don't want to be going back to the internet. It's like, oh man, what was this thing I need to do? Write up the steps, right? Write your own notes and stuff like that. But anyway, let's go ahead and close this. We're going to close this as well, and let's just get rid of all this stuff, because we are going to put this in our application now. So if you're interested in this part, keep watching. First thing that we'll have to do is we'll have to go into our NuGet package manager. We'll have to find the entity framework design package. So this one right here, Microsoft Entity Framework.design. And we'll add it to our API. So this is so we can create migrations and stuff like that. Next thing, just look for NPG, and you will find two packages, one called Entity Framework PostgreSQL and then Entity Framework Core PostgreSQL Design. Add both of these packages to your data layer and make sure that the version is like 3.4, not 5. Install that, and for the other version, for the design one, the 1.1.0 will do just fine. Once all three of these packages are added, so two of these packages here, and in our API we have the entity framework design package right there. Cool. Let's go ahead and now we will fix up a connection string. So go into appsettings.development.json. We're gonna go and create a connection strings options, and we'll just specify a default here. In here we'll say host equals 127.0.0.1, semicolon port equals 5666, where we had it. Database will be tricking underscore library, semicolon user ID we'll just use Postgres, and for password, well, my password is password. I don't know which password you set, but password. Okay. Semicolon on the end there as well, and all right. In the startup, now what we want to do is for where we add our DB contexts, let's go ahead, comment these out. We can copy them, and instead of the use in memory database, we will use PostgreSQL. Instead of these options, we'll go into connection string, we'll get connection string and specify the default option. Make sure for this to be able to extract the default connection string, it has to be contained in the connection strings options, okay? So we'll grab one of these properties, so wherever you named it. Let's go ahead, grab this part. We will go down to where we're adding the identity DB context. We'll just copy this line. I can comment out the other one in case we need to switch to local development and we just need a really rapid development instead of like going back to the database, adding stuff and all that malarkey, like running migrations. You know, not good. The other thing that we want to specify here is for when we're going to run migrations, we want to specify the migration assembly, because identity DB context comes from the whatever assembly, which is a Microsoft ASP.NET Identity Entity Framework assembly. It is we basically don't have access to that assembly, so let's just make sure that we specify our own assembly for that. So this is just so we can create migrations, okay? And that's pretty much it. These options go into the PostgreSQL right here, okay? Now, before we run any migrations or anything like that, what I want to do is fix some of the issues that I know will occur. Primarily two things. Well, basically, I know this because before I started this video, I've tried to do a test run, obviously, and the main issue that I had was around the submissions and video relationship. So this basically equates to something like the submission belongs to the video, which is not entirely correct. So let's remove the video ID from there, and let's just make a public int nullable submission ID. So we're basically saying the video may belong to a submission or not, right? And then we're just gonna have a submission, and just like that, should be all right. Okay, so now the video may or may not belong to a submission. And the next thing, if we go into one of the controllers and we find one of these options where we compare culture ignore case, the problem that we're gonna have is that this does not translate, or rather, not that it doesn't translate, specifically the PostgreSQL provider doesn't translate it to basically PostgreSQL syntax. So we have to replace this option. Let's go ahead, highlight string comparison variant culture ignore case. We'll Control-Shift F for it, so we'll search for all occurrences. And everywhere where we're using it in a query, we want to replace it with the two lower cases, okay? So version migration context right here, it's not used in a query, so let's go to the next one. Here it is used in a query, so what we want to do is we want to say to lower equals slug to lower, okay? Remove the rest, and that should be the clause now. So let's go ahead, copy this much, go to the next one where we have the next slug comparison, put it there. We can put the other thing on the other line. I can't find that one anymore. Okay. Oh, that ship has sailed. Actually, this one, what is this? New difficulty. This is not part of a query. The other part, this is in the video controller, not part of a query. This part is part of a query. Let's put it here. Obviously close the thing, otherwise you won't be able to change anything else. Try to restore the order of where you've been. I wanted to format the file a little bit, but can't have everything. On the slug here, what are we comparing? Trick ID to lower. Let's save that. Next comparison in the user controller, where we compare the username. Put the username here. Next thing is in the query extension. So this is when we search by slug or ID. Again, same thing, just replace here, put value here, and it should be fine. And I think that's it. Just double check for the occurrences that are left. If we can also go ahead and remove the string comparison invariant culture and just search for ignore case in case we're using it without the invariant culture anywhere, and it doesn't look like we are, so I'm okay with that. So 2 primary fixes: make a video belong to a submission, not the other way around, and just replace those string comparisons, and we should be fine. Now, as for creating migrations and stuff like that, if we go to the data layer, and what I like to do is I like to create a file and I call it script.md. So a markdown file where I basically say something like migrations, and here I write out the migration scripts that I need to run. So for this one, for the migrations of my DB context, which is in the data for the app DB context. So let's say app DB context. I'm going to be running them from within this project. The startup project will be tricking library.api, and the output should just be migrations. Okay. Let's copy this and we'll say migration script. This thing is going to generate a script which we should be using to extract commands, hand it over to the administrator of the database. In my case, it's me. If you are working in a company, this is how you should be using it. We will put a -i, idiopotent, or whatever the flag means. It's basically every time you generate the migration script, it's gonna give you the full migration. Okay, so then you can analyze what SQL it generates and pick out exactly the things that you need. Okay, we'll take a look at it in a second as well. So script SQL, this is going to be the file that it outputs, and the other constraints are the same. So the last bit is identity migrations and update. For this bit, let's copy this migration here. We will say add name. We will specify, instead of the app DB context, identity DB context. Startup project, we don't need it. Output, I will still say identity migration. So I'll just specify a custom directory here for when I create these, and at the end, because I'm going to be running them from the API folder, we're just going to run update from there. Okay. Now let's go ahead and create these, right? So in our tricking library.data directory, I'm going to open up the terminal there, and I'm going to run these migrations. So the name, I am just going to say initialize, and this should now create me a folder called migrations, and all the migrations are in there. Now let's go ahead and generate our script. Okay, and the script should look something like this. Okay. So it is about 300 lines long, and the primary thing that you should notice is it creates an EF migrations history table, where it basically tracks the migration that we've just created right here. Does it exist in the table? If not, go ahead and apply the database changes, right? And that's primarily how these migrations work. This is what happens when you run your database update command, okay? And if you look through this, you can really just understand what the hell is actually going on. And at the end, how like it creates indexes and how it then goes ahead and says that in the end, this migration has been applied. So you can choose to use EF migrations history table at this point or not. Again, the reason we generate this script is to understand which parts do we want, which parts do we don't want. Okay. Let's go ahead and grab this whole thing. We're going to go to the terminal where I have my Postgres user. We're going to go into PSQL. We're going to create a database tricking _ library, semicolon at the end. So that should now be created. If we list it, we can see it there. Let's go ahead and connect to it. There we are. So if we try to list any tables or anything like that, nothing's there. So now go ahead and just copy your script and it should just run. So give it a few seconds. It should go ahead and finish here. Now if we list tables, everything should be there, as expected. One thing you will notice or not notice is the ASP.NET identity, user tables and roles and claims and all that are missing. So this is the second part where we'll need to fix it up, okay? So coming back to our application, let's go ahead and run this command. So this will have to come from the trickinglibrary.api directory. And let's go ahead and initialize it. And while that's running, for the update command, we'll also need to specify the DB context. Okay, so just make sure you put that part there, save the script. And I'm gonna keep around the identity migrations folder, although in all honesty, I'm not planning on updating the identity user model in any shape or form. Okay, we have a kind of indirect way to edit the user, which is not directly tied. It just has an ID, right? So we can just point it to, if we change our identity provider for whatever reason, we can point it to a new user with a new user ID. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So we ran database update. So if we come back to the terminal and we relist our tables, everything should be here now. Okay, so now before you start the application, let's go ahead and collapse all of this. We will need to make a few changes to our seed. Now, with the IDs, if we just leave it like this and we manually specify the ID, PostgreSQL isn't going to know what to do. So if we say ID1, ID2, ID3, it's not going to increment its counter. So it will just try to start at ID1 again. Bopping my mic, so hopefully you're not wearing headphones. So first of all, we want to remove these IDs, and again, just rely on positional awareness. Make sure you get this individual ID that we set here. This one here. Try to use the mouse, maybe it will be a little bit quicker. This ID here, this trick ID, this trick ID, this trick ID, this trick ID as well. For the submissions, we don't say anything. Videos, nope. Submissions, nope. Moderator items, that is fine. And the rest, everything looks good. Now come back to the top here, and what we'll do is we'll grab an identity context, and we'll extract an identity DB context. Okay, there we go. It was a little bit hard, whatever. So the primary thing that I'm after here is I'm basically going to say, look, if the test user is in the database, that means we have already seeded the database. So what I want to do is I want to check if the test user is in the database, and that will be the clause for running this seed. So identity DB context, users, any, and this is development environment. So if there are any users that username equals test, there aren't any, seed my database. Otherwise, don't touch it, right? Okay, so that will seed the database, all good. Now let's go ahead and run the application. I already have my next application running, so we're just waiting for my .NET Core application. Let's go ahead, start it up, and while the program CS is starting, we can actually take a look here and see if it's doing anything. So let's take a look at the ASP.NET users table. There we go. We can see a bunch of stuff in there. What is that? And yeah, let's try to quit with that. And then we can also select all from, say, tricks, right? And there we go. So 24 rows, all good. Coming back to the application here, let's say 3000, and let's just double check that everything sort of works and that there are no errors. Let's just clear the console here, put it up in case anything pops up. Always look at the console, trusty. So going to test, password. Now on here, navigating to this, this works, okay. Profile, just taking a quick look. I don't have any particular checklist. Updating this. So the completed tricks have vanished. Let's actually go and take a look at what that was. So on the index page, profile submissions, so by the end we get returned a profile from the from when we put the image. So let's go into the user controller, and where we have the update profile image function, we really don't grab the submissions here, and I don't think that's what I want to do. So let's go ahead and remove the user from here. We're not going to be returning anything. For when we change the profile image, let's just say we don't specify anything. Save profile. I am going to say let's actually not save any profiles. I just want to reload the profile. So for the save profile, instead we will call initialize, I guess. Yeah, I think that will be better. So map actions of initialize. Yeah, that's right. Okay, make sure we got the map actions import. Let's put the initialize here. Let's not pass anything into it. I don't think we need to pass anything into it. Yep, no parameters. And I think that's good. So coming back here, let's give this a good old refresh. The database hopefully shouldn't update. So back to the image that we had. So this is now sort of crystallized in there. Let's go ahead and put this to something else, maybe something like this, refresh, and cool. So completed tricks refreshed as well, although we didn't notice it, but there we go. Let's also check another important piece, the submissions, which would have normally failed, but now they don't. If we would have not made the submission video change, this would fail. So make sure that you have this bit working as well, and the rest is really fine. So where did we have forwards roll, or where did we update? We maybe let's use the backflip or backwards roll. Yeah, there it is. So everything's still working, all good, right? That's pretty much it for this episode, although before I do my closing notes, we're going to do a couple of fixes. So primarily I'm just going to take this opportunity to do the things that I forgot to do, right? So first of all, authentication on the admin controller. Let's authorize this with a tricking a library constants, policies, and admin policy. Cool. So I am maybe 99% sure that is working. So let's go ahead, try to log in, admin password, and we should be able to reach the admin page as well as see the moderators. So that's fine. And actually, again, in the admin controller here where we had the models and stuff like that, let's actually get the validation context extracted as well. Let's put them in their rightfully belonging place. So validation, put it in there, invite moderator form, put it in the forms folder, and really that should be it. And yeah, just not having them in this file, that's all this is about. And the last bit was around converted files for me. So if I can delete maybe about this much, what I want to happen, or what I wanted to happen, if this refreshes just a minute, basically if we would have created a submission, let's say, what do we say in this trick? Yep, select trick backwards roll, this here, complete it, cool. So backwards roll, that is there. Now this does create some debris here. So from our background service, if we go into the video editing background service, we actually need to not only clean up this, so output converted path only when it crashes, we also need to output it, actually clean it up on finally, okay? Because the things that get outputted by our FFmpeg processor are actually now these secondary intermediate videos, right? Before we go ahead and transfer them. And yeah, other than that, that should be fine. So let's just go ahead and delete these. And what we're going to do is we're just gonna refresh this, and we're gonna do another upload, and we're just gonna make sure that there's gonna be none of that waste there. Okay, so let's go ahead, submit another submission. We'll do maybe on this video, backwards roll. Okay, something like this, complete it. Cool. Refresh it, and Oh, that was a little bit weird. Maybe it didn't exist there for a second. Whatever, don't know. And we can appreciate this for a second. Awesome. That's my friend Macker. And there we go. So no waste is generated either. Cool. So yeah, this is it for this episode. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, subscribe. If you have any questions, as always, leave them in the comment section. Ask them on my Discord server. I stream on Wednesdays and Sundays, so you can reach out and ask questions there. You know, a good opportunity. Also see what I'm up to in my free time. And as always, I'll see you in the next episode.